My name is Lorraine. I'm 67 years old, and until about 14 months ago, I believed that the hardest thing I would ever face in this life was watching my husband die. I was wrong. The night my daughter stood up at my Thanksgiving table, the table her father built with his own hands in 1987, and told me I was no longer capable of making my own decisions, I felt something shift inside me. Not break. Shift. Like a lock clicking into place rather than falling apart. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start where things actually started, which was not a Thanksgiving at all. It was a Tuesday in August, unremarkable in every way, when my daughter called and asked if her husband could stop by to look at a few things around the house. I said, of course. I always said, of course. My daughter, I'll call her by the name she's gone by her whole life, Celeste, married a man named Philip 6 years ago. Philip is an attorney, not a kind one, the kind who wears his profession like a warning. Even at my husband Gerald's funeral, Philip stood with his arms crossed and his eyes scanning the room, and I remember thinking, who looks at a room full of grieving people and calculates? But Celeste loved him, and I loved Celeste, so I made room. Gerald died 3 years ago. Pancreatic cancer. We had 11 weeks from diagnosis to the day I sat alone in a hospital room listening to a machine make sounds and then stop making them. 11 weeks is not enough time to say everything. I know that now. You think you'll have more time. You always think that. After Gerald, the house felt different, not haunted. I want to be precise about this. It felt like a sentence that hadn't been finished yet. Gerald and I had lived there for 31 years. We raised Celeste in that house. We planted the oak tree in the backyard the summer she turned 4, and now it was taller than the roofline. The house was mine, paid off completely, assessed at about $420,000 in today's market. I didn't think about that number often. Gerald and I had never been people who thought of home as an asset. It was just where we lived. Philip thought about it differently. That August Tuesday, he walked through my house the way you walk through a property you're already planning to renovate. He knocked on walls. He tested faucets. He stood in the doorway of my bedroom for a long moment without saying anything. I offered him iced tea and he declined, which I noted because Gerald always said you could tell a lot about a person by whether they accepted hospitality in someone else's home. Lorraine, he said. Philip never called me Mom, not once in 6 years. Have you given any thought to downsizing? I told him I hadn't. The house suited me fine. He nodded slowly, the way people nod when they've already decided not to listen to your answer. It's a lot of upkeep for one person. Celeste and I have been talking. We think it might be time to have a real conversation about your future. My future. I was 66 years old and in excellent health, but the word landed like a verdict. I told him I appreciated the thought and changed the subject. He left without finishing the iced tea he'd never accepted, and I stood at my kitchen window watching his car back out of the driveway and felt the first small thread of something I couldn't quite name yet. By September, the conversations had a pattern. Celeste would call, not to ask about my garden or my book club or the trip I was planning to Savannah, but to circle back to the house. Was I finding it too much? Had I noticed the gutters needed work? Did I know what property taxes were expected to do in this county over the next 5 years? She started sending me articles. Senior living options in the Pacific Northwest. Why downsizing at 65 can be the best financial decision of your life. I read them. I'm not proud of that. I read them because she was my daughter and I wanted to understand what she was seeing that I wasn't. What I didn't know then, what I only found out later when a man named Arthur told me over coffee at his kitchen table, was that Philip and Celeste were in serious financial trouble. Philip's firm had lost 2 major clients. They had a mortgage on a house that was significantly above their means, 2 car payments, and a private school tuition they'd committed to before the income dropped. They needed money, and the most obvious source of money, if you were Philip, was a $420,000 house currently occupied by one elderly woman who might, with the right pressure, be persuaded that she needed to be somewhere smaller. Arthur is my neighbor, has been for 22 years. He's 71, a retired contractor, and he has the particular gift of small-town listening. He hears things at the hardware store, at the diner, at the barber shop. He heard Philip talking to a real estate attorney at a restaurant about expediting a family property transfer, and he heard Philip use my address. He didn't come to me immediately. He sat with it for 2 days, which he later told me he regretted, and then he came to my door on a Wednesday morning and told me everything while we both stood at my kitchen counter because neither of us felt like sitting down. I remember my hands were very still. That surprised me. I would have expected them to shake. I could be wrong, Arthur said. I want to be wrong. You're not wrong, I told him. And I knew that was true before I could have explained why. That afternoon, I called my attorney. Not a family friend, not someone Philip knew. My attorney, a woman named Patricia who had done our estate planning when Gerald was alive and who had, on more than one occasion, looked at me over the top of her reading glasses and said exactly what she thought without softening it. I had always appreciated that about her. I told Patricia what Arthur had told me. I told her about the articles Celeste had been sending, about Philip's walkthrough in August, about the word future and the way it had landed. Patricia was quiet for a moment. Then she said, Lorraine, do you know whether you are still listed as the sole beneficiary in your own estate documents? I did not, in fact, know that with complete certainty. We found out the next day that Philip had, at some point in the previous year, sent my mother paperwork. I need to correct myself there. He had sent me paperwork, mixed in with some routine documents he'd offered to help organize after Gerald died. Documents I had signed without fully reading because I was grieving and he was an attorney and I had trusted my daughter's husband the way you trust people you have to trust in order to get through the day. I had inadvertently signed a document granting Philip limited power of attorney over financial decisions in the event of incapacity. Patricia's voice on the phone was controlled and careful. This is not over, she said. This is the beginning of fixing it. I want to tell you that I fell apart then. That would make sense. That would be the expected response. But something had already shifted in me, that lock clicking into place, and I didn't fall apart. I got organized. Patricia connected me with a forensic document specialist and a second attorney who handled elder law specifically. I had a full cognitive evaluation scheduled, not because anyone required it, but because Patricia advised having documentation of my complete mental clarity on record. I had a new estate plan drafted from scratch, revoking every document Philip had ever touched. I changed the name on my accounts. I notified my bank. And I did not tell Celeste any of this. That was the hardest part. Not the paperwork, not the meetings with attorneys I'd never met. The hardest part was answering my daughter's phone calls for 6 weeks and speaking normally while I knew what I knew, and she didn't know what I was doing. She called in October to say she and Philip wanted to host Thanksgiving at my house this year. So you don't have to do all the cooking, she said. We'll handle everything. You just relax. I said that sounded lovely. What I was thinking was, there is no version of this where I hand them control of my kitchen 2 weeks after I've revoked a fraudulent power of attorney. But I said lovely. And I started making my own plans. I want to tell you about 2 people who came into this without me asking. The first was my friend Beverly, who I've known since we were both 31 and our daughters were in the same playgroup. Beverly is sharp in the way that quiet people are sharp. She notices things, and she keeps what she notices until there's a reason to use it. When I finally told her what was happening, she sat across from me at her dining room table and didn't say she was sorry. She said, "What do you need? That is the right question. That will always be the right question." The second was Arthur's son-in-law, a man named Glenn who worked in the county recorder's office and who, without doing anything improper, was able to confirm for Arthur, who told me that Philip had made inquiries about the process for transferring property titles in cases of family estate simplification. Glenn's exact words, according to Arthur, were, "That man was planning something." Yes, he was. But so was I. I hired a professional home security system installed in early November, not the kind with a yard sign you're supposed to put up as a deterrent, the kind with cameras you don't advertise. I documented every conversation I could. I kept a written log with dates and times. Patricia had advised all of this. I followed her advice precisely. Thanksgiving fell on a Thursday that year, which I realize is obvious, but I remember the specific quality of the morning. Cold and bright in the way that November in the Pacific Northwest sometimes surprises you, the oak tree in the backyard holding its last few leaves. I had gotten up early and made my pie. Gerald's mother's recipe, lard crust, The kind that's more work than it looks. I made it every year. I made it this year. Celeste and Philip arrived at noon. They brought wine I hadn't asked for and a pre-made centerpiece that they placed on my table without asking, pushing aside the small arrangement of dried flowers I'd already put there. Philip did that. He moved my flowers to the counter without commenting on them. There were 6 of us at dinner. Celeste and Philip, their 2 children, my grandchildren, who I love without reservation, who had nothing to do with any of this. Arthur, who I had invited because he is my neighbor and my friend, and I was not going to spend this particular holiday without one person at that table who was entirely on my side and me. Philip had not expected Arthur to be there. I could tell by the brief recalibration in his expression when he arrived. Philip recalibrated quickly, which is what attorneys do, but I saw it. Dinner was pleasant on the surface. The food was good. The children talked about school. Arthur told a story about a bear that had gotten into someone's compost 2 streets over, and everyone laughed. I watched Philip and knew he was waiting for something. He had a plan for this evening. I could feel it the way you feel, weather coming in. When the plates were cleared and I was bringing out the pie, Celeste asked the children to go watch something in the other room. My grandchildren disappeared and the table became a different kind of table. Philip folded his hands in front of him. He had a file folder on the chair beside him that I had noticed when he arrived. "Lorraine," he said, "I think we've put this off long enough. We need to have a family conversation about what comes next." Celeste was looking at her wine glass. Arthur was looking at his hands. I set the pie down on the table and sat in my chair. Gerald's chair. The one at the head of the table. The one I'd started sitting in after he died because the table felt lopsided otherwise. And I looked at Philip. "All right," I said. He opened the folder. There was a document on top. "We've had some paperwork drafted," he said. "That would allow Celeste and me to help manage your affairs going forward. The power of attorney you signed previously gives us a framework, but Patricia," he said my attorney's name, and I noted that he knew it, "has apparently been raising questions, and we thought it would be cleaner to have everything formalized now." "Cleaner," I said. "Simpler. Better for everyone." He slid the document across the table toward me. "We're also proposing that we sell this property and use the proceeds to set you up somewhere more appropriate for your needs. There's a very nice continuing care community in Bellevue that—" "I know what this document is," I said. He stopped. "It's a full transfer of financial authority, which combined with the declaration of incapacity language in the second paragraph would effectively allow you to sell this house without my consent once you had 2 physicians' signatures, which, given that you have a personal relationship with Celeste's doctor from your firm's charity events, you may have already been working on." The silence at that table was a very particular kind of silence. Celeste looked up from her wine glass. "Patricia has been thorough," I said. "She's documented everything. The original document I signed in error. The manner in which it was presented to me. Mr. Aranam Harmon at the county recorder's office. I used Philip's real estate contact's name, which I had learned from Arthur, and I watched Philip's face do something I had never seen it do before. It lost its arrangement. The conversations you had at Canlis Restaurant in September. The inquiries made to Pacific Northwest Realty about listing timelines." Philip said. "Lorraine, I'm not finished." I reached into the pocket of my cardigan. I had worn the cardigan specifically for this pocket and placed my own folder on the table. This is a copy of my current estate documents, drafted 3 weeks ago. A copy has been filed with my attorney's office and with a secondary firm. You are named nowhere in them. The power of attorney you had me sign has been revoked, and your signature authority at my bank has been removed. I looked at Celeste. "I love you. I want you to understand that this is not about love." Celeste was crying. I had expected that, and it still cost me something. "The document you brought tonight," I continued, "if signed under the circumstances you've created, with the prior fraudulent POA as context, would constitute elder financial abuse under Washington state law. Patricia has already been in contact with the county prosecutor's office. Whether that contact results in formal action depends, in part, on what happens in the next few days." Philip pushed back from the table. He said several things in a tone I won't repeat with my grandchildren in the next room. Arthur sat very still and said nothing, which was exactly right. Philip took his folder and left. He sat in the car in my driveway for 20 minutes. I know, because I watched through the window. Celeste stayed at the table. We didn't speak for a while. Outside, the oak tree moved a little in the evening wind, and I watched it and thought about Gerald planting it when it was no taller than our 4-year-old daughter, and I thought about how he would have handled this differently than I did. With more anger, probably, and more noise. But I thought he also would have been proud of how I handled it. I didn't know all of it, Celeste said finally. I looked at her. How much did you know? She was quiet for too long before she answered, which was its own answer. We have not resolved this. I want to be honest with you about that. My daughter and I are not fine. We are in an early, careful place that doesn't have a name yet, somewhere between estrangement and repair, where every phone call is a small negotiation. Philip and I do not speak. That is probably permanent. Celeste is in therapy, which she told me 3 months after Thanksgiving with a kind of defiant shame I recognized from when she was 17. And I told her I was glad. The house is still mine. Every inch of it. The oak tree is still in the backyard. The pie recipe is still in the drawer where I've kept it for 30 years. Gerald's mother's handwriting going soft at the edges of the index card. I am 67 years old, and I live alone, and some days the house does feel too large. I know that. I'm not performing anything when I say the mornings can be very quiet in a way that has weight to it, but here is what I also know. Quiet is not the same as helpless. Being alone is not the same as being without resources. And a woman who has spent 40 years learning how to move through this world does not become a transaction just because someone decides it's convenient to see her that way. I think about what Philip didn't count on. He didn't count on Arthur. He didn't count on Beverly. He didn't count on Patricia, who had known me since Gerald was alive and who answered my call on the second ring. He didn't count on the fact that I had spent 67 years building a life that included people who would show up without being asked. He thought he saw a woman alone in a large house. He didn't see the house at all. 3 months after Thanksgiving, I did something I hadn't done in the 3 years since Gerald died. I drove to the coast, a place we used to go every October without fail. A small town on the Washington coast with a good seafood place and a beach that's too cold to swim, but the right temperature to walk. I went alone. I walked for 2 hours and I ate by myself at a table looking out at the water, and it was, genuinely, one of the better evenings I can remember in recent years. On the drive home, I called Beverly and told her about the clam chowder, and she said she wanted to come next time, and I said of course. I always say of course. But this time I meant it in a different way, not because someone needed something from me, because someone wanted to be there. That is the difference. I am learning, maybe later than I should have, to tell those two things apart. If you're watching this and you're in a situation that feels anything like what I've described, a family member who has started using the word future like a threat, paperwork you're being rushed to sign, a slow erosion of decisions you used to make without question, please hear this. You have more options than they want you to believe you have. Talk to an attorney who works specifically in elder law. Not a family friend. Not someone your relative recommended. Your own attorney. Document what you can. Trust the neighbors who tell you things over coffee even when you don't want to hear it. And know that being loved is not the same as being managed. Your home is yours. Your mind is yours. Your life is yours. I'm Lorraine. I'm 67 years old. And I'm still here. I've thought a lot about what Philip actually believed when he walked into my house that Thanksgiving evening with that folder on the chair beside him. I think he believed that grief makes people soft. That 3 years of living alone in a quiet house had worn something essential out of me. He looked at me and saw a woman who had already lost the most important person in her life, and he made a calculation. She won't fight back. She doesn't have the resources. She doesn't even know what's been done to her. He was right about one thing. I didn't know at first, but here's what I've come to understand about the way things tend to unfold when someone decides to take advantage of another person's vulnerability. They always underestimate the life that person has spent building. Philip saw my house. He never saw what the house represented, 31 years of decisions made carefully, Relationships tended honestly. Trust given to the right people and withheld from the wrong ones. He couldn't see Arthur, who listens at hardware stores. He couldn't see Beverly, who asks the right question without being asked. He couldn't see Patricia, who picks up on the second ring. You don't build those things by accident. You build them by showing up, year after year, as someone worth showing up for. That is the part that took me a long time to understand about my own story. I used to frame what happened as something that was done to me, and it was, in part. The document I signed without reading was a real violation. The slow, patient pressure campaign was real. I'm not minimizing that, but when I look at how it resolved, I can see that the resolution wasn't luck. It was the accumulated result of every honest thing I had ever done. Every time I told the truth when it would have been easier not to. Every time I kept a commitment. Every time I treated a neighbor like a neighbor instead of a convenience. Philip's plan failed not because I was clever in a single moment, but because I had spent 67 years being a certain kind of person, and that kind of person doesn't end up alone. There's something I want to say about Celeste, because I think people who hear this story want a cleaner villain and a cleaner victim than actually exist. My daughter was not innocent. She knew enough, and she chose, for a period of time, to look away from what she knew. That is a real thing she did, and it cost us something we are still in the process of rebuilding. But she is also a person who married someone persuasive and found herself over years shaped by his version of reality. I understand that more than I want to. What I keep coming back to is this: the choices we make when no one is watching, when there's no immediate consequence, when we could easily justify going the other way. Those choices are not small. They compound. Philip made years of small choices that led him to a Thanksgiving table where he thought he could take a widow's home. I made years of small choices that led me to a table where I was ready for him. Neither outcome was an accident. I'm 67 years old. I still live alone. Some mornings the house is very quiet. But I know now, in a way I didn't know before all of this, that quiet is not weakness. Stillness is not surrender. And the woman sitting alone at the head of that table had more resources than anyone in that room, except Arthur, gave her credit for, including, for a while, herself.